Joining me now, Dan Crittenbrink, former U.S. Assistant Secretary of State for East Asian and Pacific Affairs, also former ambassador to Vietnam, also served in the U.S. Embassy in Beijing. Good to have you, sir. So, administration calls this a breakthrough. Is it more a breakthrough or a truce?
Jim, I think it's much more a truce. I really like how you teed up the conversation. I see this as a de-escalation and a tactical stabilization of the U.S.-China relationship. And if it's a truce, it's potentially a fragile one. But look, I think this outcome is certainly much better than an all-out trade war. And if it goes according to plan, you know, you can see a path forward where U.S.-China relations could be relatively stable over the next year, given that President Trump should go to China in April of 26, and it's expected that President Xi will come to the United States at the end of next year.
Okay, so let's look at the scorecard, if we can, here, as to who got more out of the deal. The U.S. gets Chinese rare earths, and it gets commitments on fentanyl. China, though, it gets a pass on new export controls, port fees, and lower tariffs. Is that even?
Well, look, Jim, I think both sides wouldn't have agreed to this deal if it wasn't in, both sides' interest. I think the president can tout the grain purchases, the lifting of the restrictions on rare earths. I think he can also tout that China has pledged they're going to crack down on the flow of precursor chemicals that are fueling the fentanyl and the opioid crisis in the United States. And to your earlier point, look, both sides believe they have leverage over the other. Both sides are pretty confident that they've got escalation dominance. And I think both sides have proved they know how to hurt one another. So I think both sides can sell this domestically as a good deal. But again, as a tactical, short-term de-escalation.
You told me last time we spoke that China believes it can eat bitterness. In other words, survive more pain than the U.S. can in a trade war. What did we learn from these last several months? Is that true?
Well, it might be. Jim, I've spent much of the last month in China on two separate trips. I will say the level of confidence on the part of Chinese friends is quite striking. They really do feel confident that they can outlast us in a trade war. I think they believe that they have identified our points of weakness and they know where we have leverage. So that's a potential source of trouble going forward if the Chinese think that they have the advantage. But look, again, I'll go back to what I said a moment ago. I think the Trump administration has shown that we can generate a lot of leverage if we need to go back to that as well.
The timing of this struck me as notable because it's a year. Now, a year gets you just about, but not quite to, the U.S. midterm elections, which matter to this president here. And he knows, and China knows, the political impact of, for instance, China having suspended those soybean purchases, for instance, that impacts farmers in states that matter for him. So that's leverage that China retains, and retains at quite a key moment, does it not, for the Trump administration?
Well, sure, Jim. And, but again, on the flip side, the U.S. can always, go back to its toolkit and the trade weapons that it's used if necessary as well. I guess the way that I see it is both sides have essentially bought themselves some time here. I would predict U.S.-China relationship is going to be relatively stable for at least the next 6 months as President Trump prepares to go to China. In addition to having that stability, you would think that there's more leverage to potentially negotiate a more far-reaching trade deal. It's interesting. Secretary Bessent has this three-point frame he always talks about. He says, we're first going to de-escalate. Secondly, we're going to focus on commercial purchases. And third, we're going to try to get to broader structural trade talks. The problem is in this first year thus far, we've really not gotten any further than the de-escalation phase. But perhaps this agreement can get us beyond that so we can focus on the longer-term issues.
And to your point, that's no small thing, right? The two largest economies in the world not escalating is something.
For those who would criticize this deal as not being ambitious enough, I would say it's certainly much better than where we've been previously this year, when both sides were fighting a tariff war and a supply chain war, and we saw a real negative impact on the stock and bond markets as well. So we're certainly in a better position than we were then. And look, I think as a near-term de-escalation, I think this is a good deal for both sides.
偷偷告诉大家，我最近发现了新法宝 Royal Face 逆时奇迹系列，它有活肤露、全效精华，还有精华霜。尤其我皮肤比较偏干，所以我非常的注重保湿。保湿做得好，肌肤自然烹饪。提亮肤色更年轻，抚平皱纹超有感，而且气色变好。用心保养，每天都更美一点。美吧。